Hey, what's up guys? I'm Theo Joe, and as many of you have requested, today's video is going to show you how you can quadruple your Wi-Fi internet speed for free, and in some cases even faster than that. We're basically going to use some household materials that you already have to improve your router's antennas so they are more efficient and powerful to drastically improve their performance. I'll be explaining a few things you need for this, how it works, and of course how to do it. And it's surprisingly simple, so let's get into it. First of all, let's quickly go over some basic background info about how your router works so that you'll know what's going on. And don't worry, I'll make it easy to understand. As many of you know, inside every router is a set of antennas that send and receive radio waves between your computer or another device. When receiving data, the radio waves cause electrons in the antennas to oscillate at the frequency of the wave, which then causes a corresponding electrical current in the antenna. The router then takes the electrical signal and reads the information encoded within it. And when it's sending data, it simply does the reverse to create radio waves from an electrical signal to send that data. But the problem is that antennas in routers are relatively small, often just being a single piece of wire surrounded by a plastic shell. So only a tiny fraction of the waves ever make it to the antenna. Most of it just goes whizzing by. Not only that, the antennas experience a lot of radio interference from other radio waves around. Things like your local FM radio stations, Bluetooth devices, your cell phone, or anything else that produces radio waves all compete for the antenna. Even the Wi-Fi signals start bouncing off things around the room and come at the antenna in different directions, canceling each other out and making a lot of problems. So you can imagine that these antennas aren't very efficient at all. And to deal with this, when a router doesn't receive all the information it's expecting, it has to send another signal back to the source asking it to resend it. This causes huge drops in Wi-Fi speed. But if we were able to somehow improve the way the router receives and sends Wi-Fi data, we could solve this issue. We would just need to do two things. First, allow the antenna to collect more radio signals, and allow it to better filter through all those extra signals when they do arrive. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Now that you know the basics of what needs to be done, let's get into how we can create something to improve the router antennas. You're only going to need a few things. First, some empty plastic water bottles. You'll need one for every antenna on your router. My router has 4, so I have 4 bottles. Next, bear with me, you're going to need some common table salt. And finally, a roll of black electrical tape. These materials may seem strange and random, but it will all make sense soon. First, let me explain how exactly this is all going to work. We're going to take advantage of the properties of the salt and the electrical tape to create a type of filter that optimizes the electromagnetic waves into the router. And don't worry if you don't understand most of this, I'll walk you through everything later, but I think I should definitely go over this science because it is pretty interesting. You see, from the field of solid-state physics, we know that different arrangements of certain molecules can interact with electromagnetic waves. And what we mainly need to do here is reduce the interference between all the radio waves around the router. Because what normally happens is when the Wi-Fi signals reach the router, they don't arrive at the same time. Some may have bounced off a surface, some may have passed through materials, and others have arrived directly. When the waves are not synchronized and arrive at different times, this is known as being out of phase. For example, if the peak of one wave arrives at the same time as the valley of another, those waves will effectively cancel each other out, meaning that no net signal makes it into the router. Therefore, you need to wait until either one wave arrives without interference or multiple waves arrive in phase. Of course, this all happens at the nanosecond timescale, but say only 1 out of every 2 waves arrive in phase. That means that your Wi-Fi speed is half of what it could be. And usually it's even less than 1 out of 2. However, as I mentioned before, from research into solid-state physics, we know that certain arrangements of molecules, known as lattices, can polarize radio waves that pass through them. And specifically, the type of lattice that we're looking for is known as a face-centered cubic lattice. Just like polarized sunglasses, this only allows electromagnetic waves through if they're polarized or in phase with the other waves passing through it. And luckily, one material that has this type of lattice is common table salt. I can show you. Now, to show you what I'm actually talking about, why don't we take a quick look at some salt through the microscope? And we can use about 2000 power to do this. At this magnification, you can clearly see the cubic shape of the salt grains. This cubic shape is what polarizes the waves and forces them to be in phase. When all of the waves are in phase, even those that are not Wi-Fi, it makes the router much more able to ignore the signals it doesn't care about. Now, if you want to use your own microscope to find another material besides salt that has a face-centered cubic lattice, I recommend using a phase contrast or dark field type microscope. This will make it a lot easier to determine the structure of the material you're looking at. Of course, you could always just look up the material online to figure out what lattice type it is, but this is a lot more fun. I know a lot of that science sounds very complicated, but the basic idea of what we're going to do is we want to coat the inside of the water bottles with salt, which will create this lattice barrier to filter out the signals that we don't want. And we'll also use the electrical tape to further absorb radio signals that are completely wrong right off the bat, as you'll see. But I think that's enough science for now. So let me walk you through the steps of exactly what we need to do. Okay, so we're in the kitchen, and the only thing you're going to need for this step is the water bottles. I have 4 of them for 4 antennas, and the salt. And optional, you could use a funnel. It might make things a little bit easier. You don't really need one. And then just some water right out of the tap. Now, we want to make that coating of salt inside the water bottle to create that filter for when the waves go through it. So to do that, we're simply going to add some salt water, create some inside, and then shake it up to make that coating. So we're just going to take a little bit of salt, add some in. You don't really have to even measure it, maybe a teaspoon or so into each. And then once you add the salt, we're going to just add a little bit of water as well. And you don't want to add too much water, maybe a tablespoon or 2. And for this, we're going to use the funnel to make things a little bit easier. Just a dab. You can see I'm not adding much at all. Just enough to really cover the bottom. We can put these things aside. We're done with them. Now you just want to take the caps for these bottles and put them on to cover them up. And once they all have the water, salt, and they're covered, you can just shake them up like this. Don't have to shake it much. Just enough to get a little bit of a coating, and you might even see some of these crystals sticking to the sides. Shake it up for maybe 10 to 15 seconds for each one. If you really want to be thorough, it could be up to 30 seconds. So do that for each one. Even though there's separate drops you can see, there's going to be a very, very thin film of actual salt on the sides that you really can't see, so don't worry if it doesn't look like the whole thing is covered with water. And if you want, you can kind of do this, just roll that water around, especially on the sides to make sure everything's covered. Okay, so now we've shaken these all up, we coated the insides, so the next thing you need to do is just dump these out. So we don't need the water in there anymore. Actually, we don't really want it in there because we don't want it to wash anything off the sides when it dries. So you just want to dump these out and then let them dry overnight with the caps off. And the reason you want them to dry overnight is because we want obviously no water to be on them when we put them on the electronics, but also overnight it's going to give it enough time while it's drying to solidify those crystal structures in order to block the waves coming in. So it's very important you let it completely dry. And also, if you don't let it go overnight, it might look dry, but at the molecular level, there might still be a little bit of H2O stuck to it, so you don't want that. So I'm just going to go dump these out, and then we can come back tomorrow once these are all dried. Okay, so now that you've let the water bottles dry, there should be a light, almost invisible coating inside the water bottles, and this is going to create our type of filter that will put all the waves in phase before they get to the router antennas. Now, this next step you want to do before we actually put them on is to get your electrical tape, and we're going to wrap a few lines around each bottle. And this is going to help prevent some vertical deflection and just filter out even more of the waves that are coming in at the wrong angle. So you just cut a piece just about that long. Maybe put one near the top. Just like that. Doesn't have to be very precise at all. Cut off a second one. Put that maybe about the middle. And then finally a third. Put it towards the bottom, but not completely at the bottom. Maybe a centimeter or so from the top. And this is all you need to do. It doesn't have to be exact. The spacing doesn't really matter. And you also don't want to put too many lines because obviously then it would cover up all the regular waves that would be coming in. And the reason you definitely want to use black electrical tape is because the color black is the color black because it absorbs more wavelengths of light, and therefore it's going to absorb a little bit more in the radio frequency range as well, as many as we can. So then you just want to do that to the remaining bottles you have. Alright, that should do it. We now have all 4 covered in the strips of electrical tape. and we are now ready to go to the router and get this done. Alright, so here we are at the router, and the last thing we have to do is just pop these water bottles on, and it should work immediately. As you can see, these antennas are pretty large, so I don't really have to do anything to secure them. They just slide right on and cover pretty much the entire thing. Now, if your antennas aren't as big, these might start to fall off, and you might have to use some more electrical tape to secure them towards the bottom. That one fell over. Alright, so that is it. Now, it does definitely look kind of weird, but it should work great. Okay, so now that we've attached our contraptions to the router, we should have a much faster Wi-Fi speed already. But we obviously want to make sure this worked. So I did a couple Speedtest Net Tests, so we can take a look at some of those before and after results. This is a test from before I attached the plastic bottles. Alright, so it's obviously not bad. Around 100 megabits download, and the upload looks like it's going to be about the same, around 100 or so. Already a pretty good internet speed with Wi-Fi, so let's see if we can do even better. Now let's look at after the bottles are added, and wow, alright, so these are way faster downloads, much better than expected even. Wow, this is pretty surprising. And for the upload, again, amazing result. This is great. So let that finish to be sure. Alright, yep, so clearly this made a huge difference. So there you have it. Using just some basic table salt and water bottles, our Wi-Fi speed more than quadrupled. Now, obviously your results may vary, but every router I've tried this with typically gets at least 4 times faster, depending on the antennas. And if your router doesn't have antennas sticking out though, sorry, there's probably no way to do this. But besides that, this should be valid everywhere. So of course, I want to know how well this worked out for you guys. Let us know maybe your speeds before and after. And you can let us know down in the comment section, and definitely also read the description for more information. If you want to keep watching, I'll put some other videos right here. You can just click on those. And if you want to subscribe, I make new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, so it should be worth it. So as usual, thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.